Now I'll present the qualifications framework for the East African community. And sorry for the time lost, I'll try to be brief. And the East African community brings together 6 partner states, which is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan. And it has a long history that relates to the first community that collapsed in 1977 and the new community in which we are now, which has these 6 partner states. The first one had the 3, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and it had a strong history in educational cooperation, which actually still plays a key role in anchoring many of the things that we are trying to do today. So it's one of the fastest growing communities in Africa today, and we have achieved quite a bit in cooperation in education. I could take the next slide. One of the main goals of the community is to facilitate regional integration, and this is where harmonization of education comes in strongly. The 6 partner states have committed within the treaty establishing the community to cooperate in education, human resource development, research, and training, and that is why these common policies and principles and frameworks are quite important. And this also relates to, I could take the next slide. When you look at the second pillar, the Common Market Protocol, which came into force in 2010, Article 11 of that protocol requires the community to facilitate the mobility of students and professionals by recognizing both academic and professional qualifications. And this is a very strong anchoring of what we are doing now in developing these regional qualifications framework. Next slide. And the harmonization of the education systems of the EAC partner states, as I've given in the brief history before, is anchored on that Article 102 of the treaty and related also to the Common Market Protocol that I've mentioned. And this started in the year 2008 when the community undertook a study to see how best we could harmonize the education systems of the community. And 7 strategies were developed covering the different cycles of education. And the higher education level has been totally or completely harmonized through the efforts of the Inter-University Council for East Africa. And I would like to mention also clearly from the start that our regional qualifications framework is not only for the higher education sector, but is quite holistic. It covers the different cycles, the different levels, but the focus here, the higher education level, university level, moved much faster. The other levels are also contained within these qualifications frameworks, but there are some specifications that still need to be developed. I take the next slide. For the higher education sector, it is mainly to develop a framework for comparability of systems within the partner states of East Africa. And a number of rationales that we have that have been talked about in the previous presentations are actually common for the East African region. And most important to state in this slide is the fact that through these efforts of harmonization, the East African Community region was declared a common higher education area on 20th May 2017. And this means that the region is expected to facilitate a lot of mobility of students, teachers, and professionals. And that even anchors the undertaking we are having on this qualifications framework to have even more relevance and implications. So the operationalization of it will actually also facilitate the operationalization of this common higher education area. And one of the immediate consequences that students moving within this region now pay same fee as home students of the receiving institution. And there are quite a number of activities going on within the centers of excellence, within the mobility of students between the universities, mobility of professionals within the mutual recognition agreements, which I'm responsible for, which actually now takes us forward as ways of implementing this common higher education area and actually the common market protocol that I already talked about. Next slide. And largely the framework I'm talking about today has been developed through the Inter-University Council for East Africa. within the East African community, we have developed certain specialized institutions for key areas of our activities, and one of them is the Inter-University Council for East Africa, which is located in Kampala, Uganda, whose main responsibility is to coordinate higher education. Most of the activities and responsibilities of the council are listed there for your reference. Next slide. In 2013, as this process was going on, the IUCA, which is our institution, undertook a study which actually made it very possible to anchor the development of this qualifications framework. They looked at the qualifications types, learning cycles, qualifications levels, entry articulations, all those aspects listed, which was an important precursor to the development of the qualifications framework for the East African community. I'll take the next one. The process of developing these qualifications framework has been quite participatory, which means that it brought together different stakeholders, including government ministries responsible for education and even immigration. It brought in the quality assurance agencies in the different partner states, other stakeholders, including the private sector, to enable us develop this instrument that could enable classification of qualifications based on those set criteria, and also integrating the education and training from the different partner states into one unified structure, which could be recognized by all. And a number of other rationales, as I had mentioned earlier, allowing comparability of qualifications and movement of credits after agreeing on what credits are and the conditions for moving, allowing for credit mobility. And the last bullet is actually what I started with, the participatory approach that was used in developing this. Then I take the next slide. This is actually the key aspects of the East African Community Qualifications Framework for Higher Education. We have the structure, which includes the qualifications descriptors for each of the levels, the qualifications types for the different levels, the multiple entry and exit strategies for, and this is also anchored on what some of the different presenters earlier had talked about, the provision of the different pathways from the different levels of education up to allowing participants in the process to get up to the higher levels of education, which is the university level. And also recognition of prior learning, be they formal, informal, or non-formal, and how these are assessed to allow participation in the different pathways that they qualify to get into. And then lastly, the credit accumulation and transfer, where our credit system is also notional, where 1 credit means 10 hours, and also modalities for facilitating the transfer of credits across institutions in the different institutions and systems in the different partner states. I could take the next slide. That is just the cover of the document of our qualifications framework. I could take the next slide. I think these, as I've already alluded to that, and I noted that we already lost quite some amount of time in the earlier presentations. This is actually part of the rationale why we have the framework convergence scales for the different levels, better understanding of achievements, comparability of qualifications, a tool to enable development of skills and employability. And this actually resonates quite well with us as a community, because we would like to develop skills together, possibly also through our respective centers of excellence, which are dedicated to develop skills at different areas, especially where there are serious deficits. And also as a common market, we have to provide opportunities, wider opportunities for employability across the community, which now is a common market with different rights and freedoms given to the citizens. Next. This is for the higher education level, the qualifications framework. For our qualifications framework, I noted that I don't remember very well whether the SADC one had 10 levels, but ours has 8, but you'll find that the other partner states within the community have 10 levels, but that's not the most important. So the higher education level has the following levels, sub-levels within that level of education. So since this was the level that I was largely focusing on and which the Inter-University Council has largely developed, these are the levels for the higher education sector. The next. As was explained in the SADC qualifications framework, this framework also recognizes prior learning. And this is to acknowledge the skills, competencies, and other ethos obtained through formal training, non-formal training, and other experiences that the learners could have gone through. And these are measured against specific learning outcomes and can possibly also be verified. The next slide. The next slide mainly presents to us the building blocks of the qualifications framework, which also relate to what I've just said. The non-formal learning is taken into consideration and recognized, the formal learning and the informal learning. And this is also based on the competency-based approach to learning, based on learning outcomes and the competencies that the learners are expected to demonstrate after completing each cycle. We could go to the next one. I think this is the level descriptors, and this also came out in the SADC presentation and the other presentations. What are considered largely within the learning outcomes at the different levels are the knowledge competencies that the learners do demonstrate, the practical skills that they need to demonstrate at the end of completing the learning provided at each of the levels, the social skills, which are also now quite important in the region within the competency-based approach that we have used, which go hand in hand with the values, attitudes, and the professionalism, which we need to also build in and inculcate. Communication, leadership, team building skills, information management, lifelong learning, and some of these have now been included in actually, they run across the different levels of these qualifications framework. There are still some challenges on how to verify some of them because some of these are much softer, but the mechanisms for verifications have been developed and need just to be sharpened. The next. These are just the different levels that I have mentioned before, and you could see how it runs from level 1, where we have the basic education, to the level 8 with the doctoral education. And these levels have sub-levels within them, which can be seen in details when you look at the qualification framework in details. I could take the next slide. These are the minimum credits for graduation within the different levels. And as I mentioned earlier, 1 credit is taken to be 10 hours. This could be for actual learning within formal learning setups or other attributes that learners can gain in other related trainings that contribute to that overall qualification. And you can see how they run to the lower levels of the qualifications framework. It also shows on the last part the different types of qualifications that correspond to the qualification, the different credit levels, from the basic general education to the upper postgraduate level education. I think the TVET sector doesn't come strongly here because right now we are embarking on the process of finalizing the qualifications framework for TVET, though some specifications for the TVET sector has already been given within this general qualifications framework, but we have to operationalize the TVET sector, which will be shown just slightly in one next slide. Next one. Yeah, to enable us operationalize this qualification framework, there are policies which are actually like an addendum towards the end of the publication, which is this qualifications framework. And this includes the policies for issuance of qualifications, the different pathways, which I had already mentioned earlier, the qualifications register and policy, and where this register is deposited. Usually the qualifications authorities in the different partner states and the commissions or councils for university education, especially for the university level, has this and coordinated centrally by the Inter-University Council for East Africa. Then the other policy is the addition and removal to the qualifications. Then guidelines for alignment with national qualifications frameworks. And what I could have said from the onset is that the regional qualifications framework also operates or acts as a very important reference point for the national qualifications frameworks. And it doesn't mean that we do not have we do away with the national qualifications frameworks, but the partner states have to align their national qualifications frameworks to the regional one. And this requires a number of things, including developing capacity, as was indicated in the previous presentation too. And also to note that the different partner states are at different levels with this process, with Rwanda, Kenya, and Tanzania really much higher than compared to, for example, Burundi and South Sudan, who are some of the latest entrants into the East African community. And also important and also alluded to in the previous presentation is the recognition of prior learning. And I think there are so many similarities and overlaps when I was listening to the other presentations, and these actually built a case for closer cooperation between the different regions. I see a lot of similarities with the SADC region, a lot of similarities with the national qualifications frameworks that have been presented before, irrespective of the regions they come from. And there is a lot of room for even wider coordination between beyond a regional body like the East African community and working together with other regions. And I think this is part of what this process is supposed to enable us to get to. We get to the next slide. This is largely about governance, how the process is governed, and maybe there would have been some questions on how partner states respond to this. And here we list how they use the qualifications framework largely as a reference tool, as I indicated earlier. And they relate their national qualifications framework in this to the regional one to provide more transparency in the undertakings that the partner states would use. And it's also important in contributing to the quality assurance within the partner state systems and using the learning outcomes, which I talked about earlier in defining and describing the qualifications so that these are common across the different partner states. And the partner states finally have a responsibility of designating a national authority to be responsible for this, and that's why in almost all of our partner states there are national qualifications authorities being established, and also they are the councils responsible for university education, whose main mandate is actually to undertake quality assurance within the higher education sector. And what the East African community does through the Inter-University Council is to convene regular meetings of these qualifications authorities and councils to enable them share experiences, develop these policies and principles together, and ensure to the extent possible that they do work. Next slide. This is about what IUCA does, which I've already alluded to, bringing together these authorities and councils and other stakeholders. Ensuring that the system is sustainable and sustainably managed. continue to build confidence in these qualifications frameworks, both at national and regional level, and also to build capacity, which was indicated earlier. And maybe this is an area where we have not done so much. Maybe the national qualifications authorities have done much on capacity building, but I think it is one area which we can work on at a regional level, and also in collaboration with other regional qualifications frameworks or other regional or international players. And also important is the fifth one, to align this regional framework with other international qualifications. And I think this is part of what this process is leading us to, or will contribute to, as I had earlier mentioned. I could take the next one. I think this was to talk a bit about the TVET level. Something is missing, so I could, the level, okay, just go to the next, is okay. I was asked to mention a bit about the impacts of COVID-19 on the operationalization of our qualifications framework. But generally, I think across the world, and largely for Africa and specifically for East Africa, the pandemic itself has been unprecedented, and the consequences to the education system the same. And up to now, we have not got out of this. Still, in most of our partner states, the education sector is still largely closed, though we have had varied responses by the partner states, in which the United Republic of Tanzania didn't close its schools. The schools are running normally. Burundi is running the same, but in some partner states such as Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, there had been impacts that led to closure of schools, and some are beginning to open up again, but not fully. There have been some negative impacts and drawbacks that have actually affected some of the gains we have made in operating regionally. And part of this is parochial nationalism. The COVID-19 actually made partner states or nations to look much more inwards than the regional approach that we have had before. It enabled us to see how fragile our education systems were, that such an act or such an occurrence could actually completely bring education to a stop in the whole community and almost in the whole world. And another indication to us is the weak sustainability of our education systems. With COVID-19, the region could not have other alternative mechanisms to provide education. And it has been a very important wake-up call for the region now to collectively or individually as nations to look at alternatives that can propel learning in such situations, or even when such situations are not there. Related to that is the poor infrastructure for online delivery. And I saw a question popping up about inclusivity, and that bullet could partly respond to that. We saw very glaring situations of the exclusivity of the systems. Many were left out, especially when certain schools or systems tried to deploy online delivery. Very specific to the operationalization of our framework, mobility and exchange of students, staff, and professionals came almost to a complete halt. Right now, it's still very difficult to move. And we had students in the different partner states. We had to put aside a special COVID fund to ensure that the students who were studying in the different centers of excellence in the different partner states could still continue to be there, and had some cushioning to continue being there. But there were a number of social challenges across the board for teachers, the learners, the parents, and a lot of time lost. We could take the next slide, which could all actually be my last. But they say that there is no such disaster without positive sides. I think it has been a very important learning session for us. We have had different meetings of our sectoral councils for health, for education, and our different stakeholders. And it has been a very important wake-up call for the community and the different nations in this region to invest in ICT and get alternative ways of providing learning. And a lot of effort is already going on with this. It has also led to a lot of attitude change towards doing things the way we are doing, which actually will facilitate, in a way, the implementation of these frameworks. Previously, when people were asked to join online trainings, to join online classes, the attitude was quite different. But now, largely, a day doesn't pass without people being in these online platforms. And for me, who has worked on internationalization for some time, this is really a game changer. That's my next item, such that we will not so much need to get air tickets, go to where we can facilitate a bit of this, especially capacity building. We can do a lot of capacity exchange, capacity building through these online mechanisms. And related to that, it can actually facilitate and speed up the implementation of our regional qualifications framework, because these platforms can give us opportunities for capacity building, sharing experiences, discussing issues that could be hindrances or barriers to the implementation of the framework. We see better the roles of the centers of excellence. Some of them played a very important role in coming up with some interventions, including the universities in the different partner states. It brought up more concretely the need to enhance, to harmonize regional policies and frameworks so that even in such circumstances, there is still seamless flow of people, flow of students, flow of teachers, though within the basic restrictions that can be attributed to health issues and etc. The new pedagogical approaches do not need to be elaborated more based on the online learning that we had already mentioned earlier. And this also requires a lot of capacity building, especially for the teachers. We have identified quite a lot of gaps, weaknesses in our system, which actually need to be responded to, and support systems, especially to children, whether they're in school or out of schools. We saw a lot of deficits, which are also for teachers, as I already mentioned earlier. And lastly, the need to build on efficiencies of our systems. I think if we try the next one, it might be actually the end of my presentation, and I thank you so much.